Ezekiel chapter 12, starting at verse 22. Son of man, what is this proverb you have in the land of Israel? The days go by and every vision comes to nothing. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I am going to put an end to this proverb, and they will no longer quote it in Israel. Say to them, the days are near when every vision will be fulfilled. For there will be no more false visions or flattering divinations among the people of Israel. But I, the Lord, will speak what I will, and it shall be fulfilled without delay. For in your days, you rebellious people, I will fulfill whatever I say, declares the sovereign Lord. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, the Israelites are saying the vision he sees is for many years from now, and he prophesies about the distant future. Therefore, say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says: none of my words will be delayed any longer. Whatever I say will be fulfilled, declares the sovereign Lord. Wow. Do you believe that every word that is written will be fulfilled? Do you have regard for what is written in the Bible? Or are you like the people of Israel who kind of think, well, yeah, it's kind of true, it's going to come to pass, but you know what? It's for the distant future, right? All these prophecies, like, they're kind of obscure and they're for way in the future. I'm not going to spend a lot of my energy living with urgency. Sanctification is a process. God knows that. But let me ask you a question. How long is that process ideally supposed to last? Remember the woman who was caught in adultery? What did Jesus say to her? He said, it's in John 8 if you want to read it. He said, go and sin 10 times this week, but the following week sin 9 times, and in the following week sin 8 times, and in the following week sin 7 times. And slowly, over the years, try to sin less and less and just kind of sanctify yourself over a period of, maybe a few decades. No, he didn't say that. He said, go and sin no more. Wow. Like, talk about rapid sanctification. Like, now, did that woman go and sin no more? No. Likely not, because remember what John tells us. He's in First John. He says, look, if anybody claims to be without sin, he's a liar. We sin, we have an advocate, Jesus Christ, the great high priest, who understands our weaknesses. He knows he's had every temptation, that we've had. He knows that we are but flesh, mortals who struggle. And when we struggle for him, when we struggle against sin, when we try to walk in purity and try urgently to obey his word, every wish of his should be our command. When he sees us trying to do that, that is really precious in his sight. He values our faith. He values our obedience. He values our urgency because it shows that we're serious about it. Right? Imagine if a person says, well, I'm on the process of sanctification. I'll slowly kind of grow in my faith. Look, he could come back at any time. The end is very near. We're at 6,000 years. Understand that. 6,000 years from Adam. 6 days. On the seventh day he rested. The seventh day. There's this idea that I hadn't heard for most of my life, although it's been around from the very beginning, is that 7-day creation. I mean, every people on earth celebrate a 7-day week. They observe a 7-day week. Why is that? I asked some of my Hindu friends recently, why do you observe a 7-day week? They had no idea. Like, have you thought about it? Have you ever met someone who doesn't observe a 7-day week? I mean, you would think there would be some, other religious groups that would not celebrate a 7-day week. It is, everybody celebrates a 7-day week. Why? Because that's what God made. He made the world in 6 days. On the seventh day, he rested. Now, I had never really thought about this or heard about this ever in my life, but it's recently hit me hard. In the Bible, it equates a day to 1,000 years. Moses would be the one to know it, right? He wrote the Torah. And what does he say in Psalm 90? He says a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord. And Peter also echoes that idea. David mentions it in one of the Psalms. I can't remember which one it is. And then in the Epistle of Barnabas, which I recently read, he just spells it out clear as day. I mean, very plainly, he says that God made the world in 6 days and they represent 6,000 years. And after 6,000 years, everything's going to come to an end and God's going to come back and reign for 1,000 years. I mean, I'm kind of paraphrasing that, but it's in the Epistle of Barnabas. It's a little book. You can buy it on Amazon. It's like a letter about the size of maybe the book of Romans, something kind of similar. And when I discovered that, wow, okay, this is urgent. Okay, in Isaiah 46 verse 10, it says, God is speaking and he says, I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is yet to come. So how do we know the end? We have to go back to the beginning. Well, what happened in the beginning? 7 days, right off the bat, 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. And what do we see right toward the very end of the Bible? We see 1,000-year millennium reign of rest. The Sabbath millennium. See, in the Bible, we don't just have Sabbath days, there are Sabbath weeks. The Sabbath applies to more than just a day. The concept of a Sabbath, it applies to greater periods of time as well than just a day. Things kind of work in patterns, right? Like prophecy is more of a pattern than it is a prediction. We see patterns, right? And we can see these patterns throughout the scriptures, and they come to a climax. It's almost like if you throw a pebble into the water, it's going to create ripples all the way to the other side of the pond. The ripples will go out until they reach their fulfillment, right? Isaiah says, every word of the Lord, it does not return void. It goes out and it does not return void. Okay, so it's really important that we understand the urgency here. Everything God has spoken will come to pass, and we could be at the very cusp, at the very end of everything. Just because we go through a long period of time without anything seeming to happen, it doesn't mean that things can't happen really quickly. I heard a really great quote last year, I think it was, and it just stuck with me. It goes something like this. There are decades when nothing happens, and weeks when decades happen. And that is absolutely true. I would say in the last 100 years, like in my grandparents' lifetime. I mean, my grandparents are in their mid 90s right now. So let's say 100 years. I mean, their lives have they've lived in like the most peaceful area of the world in the most peaceful times. The whole Western Empire. I mean, have we seen war? Sure, they were kids when World War II was ongoing, but they themselves haven't seen war. They haven't seen famine. They haven't really seen plague, major disease. I mean, sure, they had hardships. I'm not saying that. And sure, things have changed. I mean, my grandparents, they lived in half the barn and their animals lived in the other half of the barn. They had hard lives. But when we just take a chunk of of the world's history here and we say, okay, I mean, what really changed? Did things massively change in their lifetime? And not really in many ways. You know, they ate the same thing. They never went hungry. They had enough to, you know, they prospered. They could prosper. They could work hard and prosper. They could, live in a country where, like, they just faced very little persecution, very little oppression. Um, so we've this period in history, really, in our corner of the world here in the West, it has been unparalleled. Like, for, well, not saying that there hasn't been peace in the world previously, but if you just think about the abundance that that generation had, that a man could have just a normal job and raise a family of like 10 kids. He could be like a teacher or be like a laborer, a construction worker, and be able to afford to raise a family of 10 kids. I mean, can we do that today? The days are coming when that's going to end, and we're going to face hardship, just like many generations throughout history have. But, we need to understand that the words of the Lord, they will come to pass. And just because things have continued for a long time without any signs of change, it doesn't mean that we should get comfortable and assume that the rate of change or the trajectory we're on is really going to continue this way indefinitely. It could come to an end really quickly. So the most important thing to understand is that every word in the Bible will come to pass. I think one of my favorite verses in relation to this topic is in the book of Habakkuk. It's in chapter 2, and it's verse 3. It says, "For the vision awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end, and it will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay." That's the NIV. Some translations say tarry. I like that word better. Though it tarry, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Remember the parable Jesus told of the the 10 virgins in Matthew 25? The bridegroom was delayed. I mean, so many verses are about this. Look, this concept. We must show urgency in times where everything seems like nothing is happening. Right? God comes at the moments when literally nobody's expecting him. Remember when Jesus was born? If it hadn't been for the angels, like, just filling the sky, appearing to the shepherds, would anybody have been like gone to see Jesus? I mean, was anybody waiting for it? Were there any priests or prophets who had read the scriptures and thought, okay, it's going to happen soon. We calculate the time from Daniel. Okay, how many weeks of years? Okay, the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. We know that from Micah. Okay, was anybody trying to piece things together and just be like, this is imminent, guys. We need to wait for it. Well, there were two people, remember, in the temple. There was Simeon and there was Anna. They were like they were waiting. They were absolutely waiting. Now, did they know for sure when the time was going to be? Probably not. They didn't have the day down or the month down or the year down. They knew something was coming. They knew the Messiah, the King of Israel, was coming. And so they waited. And they waited with urgency. Remember, it says Anna was in the temple day and night, like fasting and praying. That's urgency. Simeon, I mean, why was he in the temple at that time? Because he was showing urgency. When God comes back, he's going to catch us doing whatever he should catch us doing. Right? When what we are doing when he comes, he's going to catch us in the right thing that sums up what we, like what we do. Right? So if God comes back, when Jesus comes again, the second coming, and he finds you fighting with your husband, it's not like you're going to be able to say, oh, well, look, this was just an exceptional day. I was on my period. I was grumpy. I'm sick. The kids are screaming. And most of the days I'm better than this. And it's just this day. Look, remember what he said to the woman caught in adultery. Go and sin no more. Show some urgency. Look, don't assume that you have 10 years to learn how to treat your husband right. Learn now. Commit yourself right now that it's not going to be another minute. You are never going to fight with your husband from this day forth and forever. You are never going to hurt him. You're never going to speak against him. You're going to bring him joy from this day forth and forevermore. Look, God is looking for a humble people. God is looking for a quiet people. Remember what it says. What is it, Paul? Or is it Peter? I can't remember now. Who say, in quietness, a quiet spirit. A woman must, it's a precious thing in God's sight if a woman has a very quiet, humble spirit. Are you quiet? Or are you loud? Rebellious people tend to be loud. So I was just walking to the coffee shop to get a tea, and there were these two cars doing like street racing right past me, and I was just like, oh God, please come soon. Like they were loud, tons of exhaust, fumes. They were the kind of really souped up cars, and they're just obnoxious, probably teenage boys driving these cars. And it's like, Lord, I long for quietness. I long for a world that is clean and there aren't any rebels. Rebels tend to be loud. A wife who is rebellious, she tends to be loud. Have you ever noticed that? Try to be quiet. Try to develop quickly in humility. Yes, it takes time, and we should always ask God for patience. Ask God for forgiveness and mercy as we're trying. And the same thing, a wife should ask her husband for patience. She should ask her husband for mercy and forgiveness when she fails in the areas that she's trying to work toward. We should try to show a little bit of urgency. It's honoring to God if we show urgency. It's not honoring to God to think, okay, well, look, this stuff is for the distant future. All the stuff God says in the Bible is for the just far in the future. It doesn't apply to my time. It doesn't apply to me. I mean, every morning of my entire life, I've woken up and the days have been pretty much the same. Why would it change tomorrow? Why would the day suddenly change? Like, why would the sun not rise? Or why would the moon not shine? Why would there be no stars? Everything is basically the same. There's a range of things that we've experienced, and anything that falls within that range is kind of expected. Well, the Bible says a day is coming that will be unlike any other day. You won't be able to draw on your past experiences. It's going to be completely unique. I mean, just think about what it says in 1 Thessalonians, right? He's going to descend with a shout, the voice of an archangel, the blast of trumpets, with blast of a trumpet. I can't remember the exact wording. And his people are going to be caught up with him in the air. Is that a normal day? No. I mean, the sky's rolling back like a scroll. Look, so many things in the Bible are unfulfilled. They may be fulfilled in kind of a ripple, like the pattern is there, but we haven't seen the specific outworking of that particular prophecy yet. For example, Jesus' feet touching down on the Mount of Olives in the book of Zechariah. Has that happened? Has the mountain split into two? No. Now, did his feet touch down on the Mount of Olives? Absolutely. Right? Is the Mount of Olives is one of these ripples, right? Remember in Ezekiel chapter 11, when the glory of the Lord departs from the temple, it stops over the Mount of Olives. It doesn't explain exactly why it stops. Right? It's going east. The glory of God is going east, to be with the people in exile, to be with his people. Even when God's very angry with his people, he's still there. He's the one rebuking them. He's the one disciplining his people. Right? That's why he was giving Ezekiel all these visions and telling him, do this, do that. He did so many weird things. And the people, at one point, they say, look, what is the meaning of all of you? You're acting so weird. What's the meaning of all of this? Right? God works in mysterious ways, and he had Ezekiel, the Son of Man, work in mysterious ways. And then there was another Son of Man. There's another ripple. There's another pattern, the Son of Man. Remember when Jesus said, remember when the disciples said, look, we have two swords here. And Jesus said, that'll be enough. To me, it's very clear he was referring back to Ezekiel. It says, let the sword strike twice, even 3 times. Twice is like a warning, basically. 3 times is total destruction. And I think the Israelites got taken in exile in 3 waves. Right? So let the sword strike twice. The first wave was in the first attack. Nebuchadnezzar attacked Judah in 605 BC, I think it was. And he took Daniel in that wave of the exiles, and then he attacked again in 597 BC, took Ezekiel into exile, And then the third time was the total destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So we see these patterns, right? Now, what made me start talking about these patterns? The Mount. Okay, so for example, the Mount of Olives, right? So we see in Ezekiel 11 that God stops above the Mount of Olives, as though he's kind of looking back at the city which he loves, at his temple, and his heart is like yearning for to be with his people. And then remember when Jesus comes, so many times he's on the Mount of Olives. Remember the triumphal entry. He goes from the Mount of Olives into the temple. And then when he departs, it's from the Mount of Olives. Right? So much as the Mount of Olives. And when he comes back, it's going to be the Mount of Olives. That's a pattern. That's a ripple effect. And so we need to be ready. Look, just because we're in the valley between two ripples doesn't mean that we shouldn't be urgently waiting. Remember Daniel? He was such a great example. Remember when he was searching the scriptures, he was searching the prophet Jeremiah as to how long God had decreed the exile to be. And then he discovered by reading the words of Jeremiah that it was going to be 70 years. That was exciting to him, right? Because the end had been decreed. Now, he knew in his heart, he knew that God was going to take his people back to Jerusalem. I mean, that's why Daniel always prayed toward Jerusalem. He yearned for his city. I mean, all the people in exile yearned for Jerusalem. Remember what it says in the Psalms, "Oh, Jerusalem, if I forget you, let my right hand forget what it's supposed to do." Something like that, right? They did not forget about Jerusalem. Remember Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king. He just was deeply grieved over the walls of Jerusalem, that the walls of the great city were torn down, broken. And remember what God says in Isaiah 58, "My people will be called repairer of broken walls." God wants a people who repair broken walls, who care about the broken walls, who show urgency for See, Nehemiah didn't just care, he showed urgency. And this is exactly why I'm making these videos. I'm the only person I know who's urgent, who's calling women to urgency. We don't have time left. You don't have 10 years for sanctification left. Stop thinking you have all the time in the world. Shape up right now, this minute, this night. Get serious. Get serious about how to be a good wife. What does God require of you? Search the scriptures. Think about it. I mean, I've made dozens of these videos already, just pacing around in my living room, just holding my cheap microphone, sipping my peppermint tea that I just went to get. I'll just take a sip here. Show some urgency. Cancel your plans, cancel your fun date nights and all of this stuff. All this useless activity that people plan and people engage in. Unless God is first and foremost, unless you are waiting for the imminent return of Christ, nothing matters. All your useless activities are not going to matter. Make the watching and waiting for the return of Christ the central aspect of your day. I mean, everything you do must revolve around that. You wake up, you think about him, his return. How do you carry yourself? How do you walk? And you remember in the Psalms, I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. Okay, I need to walk carefully. Be careful to love the Lord your God. Remember, that's what Joshua says. It says in Joshua, be very careful to love the Lord your God. We need to be careful. Look, distractions and temptations are all around us. I think it's Psalm 58 that says, on every side the wicked... No, it's not Psalm... is it Psalm 7? Is there Psalm... it could be Psalm 7, I think. Or one of those Psalms, first few Psalms in the Bible. First few Psalms in the book of Psalms. It says, on every side the wicked prowl, as vileness is exalted among the children of man. On every side the wicked prowl, as vileness is exalted among the children of man. If that's not relevant for today, well, it's not relevant for any time then. Look, vileness is being exalted among the children of man, right from the top of the government down to the average, just the average idiot that doesn't even consider the reality of God, has no regard for the ways of God, has no regard for the word of God, has no regard for the existence of God. He's like just the fool, the vile man. And I think it's Psalm 10 where he says in his heart, God has forgotten. He's hidden his face. He will never see it. Right? He's just been compared to a lion lurking in ambush, plundering the poor, stealing, robbing, murdering, just all the vile stuff. He's like a lion eager to tear, as a young lion lurking in ambush. What does that say? I think that's Psalm 18 maybe. Arise, O Lord, confront him, subdue him. Deliver my soul from the wicked by your sword. From men by your hand, O Lord. From men of the world whose portion is in this life. Is your portion in this life? Or is your portion the Lord? The Lord is my portion and my cup. Remember, David says that. And remember, Moses says in Psalm 90, he says, you are our dwelling place. Oh Lord, you're it. You're our dwelling place throughout all generations. Like, are you fixated on the Lord? We need to be, and I'm talking to my own two big ears. God gave me big ears to just hear my own words first, to hear the word of the Lord. Look, we must show urgency. Now is the time. We have lived in safety and comfort for many generations. We don't know what our grandparents really suffered and what they really endured. But in the time that we've known them, there's a very high chance your grandparents took you out for ice cream and they did they seemed to have pretty easy lives. And that was true for my grandparents later on in life. At the beginning, it was brutal. They worked really hard, but over time, toward their retirement and into their retirement years, they lived a very comfortable life, really easy life, where they'd just go out for coffee every morning with their friends and go out for ice cream, just read a bit of the Bible in the morning and, have an afternoon nap and just... It was really the easiest life you could imagine. And a couple of my grandparents are still alive. They lead very easy lives. Now, I'm not saying you don't have challenges when you're old. One of the reasons they've lived so long is because they've had very easy lives toward the end here. Because naturally, you don't live into your mid-90s. If you live in a hard environment, and you don't have your children around you. Let's say you don't have health care, you don't have whatever, but you pretty much are dead by 70, 80. You know what was it, is it Moses in Psalm 90 where he says, you know, basically a man can live 70 years, or if he's lucky, 80. I think King David lived for 70 years. Um, so my grandparents and though that generation has way outlived him. They're in their 90s. So when we look at their lives and we look at our parents' generation and we look at our generation, we see certain things changing, right? We see the medium of music delivery changing from, like, in my life, the earliest I remember is tapes, like cassette tapes. And then it moved to CDs. And then it moved digital. There was a little phase where there was the mini discs. It moved to digital. And so we've seen these changes. We've seen the different modes of media. There was the newspaper, and there was the radio. When I was a kid, my dad listened to the radio, and we always got the newspaper every day. There was no computers or really like internet at that time, YouTube, or we didn't have a TV growing up. So I know a lot of people had TVs and stuff. So, but think about this: has there really been any major like cataclysmic event in your whole life? I mean, for a lot of people, probably hearing about 9/11 was it. Like, you think about the biggest event in our hemisphere. Well, it was probably the hearing about 9/11, but that's just hearing about it. You didn't even live through it. You weren't there to witness it unless you actually live in New York City. Or earthquakes or floods, or yes, we go through times of hardship and loss, but if you just think just generally, I don't want to discount anybody's suffering. Our generation is plagued with mental illness, mental hardship, anxiety, depression. All of that is very, very hard to live with. But just think about things from the prophetic side, the patterns of prophecy. Some big things changed in our grandparents' lives, and maybe even our parents' lives, depending on how old your parents are. Israel became a nation. Whoa, that's massive. That is a massive, massive development. For anybody who's read the Bible and thought about it, you at least it's food for thought. You'd be like, man, what you're reading, passages like in Hosea chapter 6, where it says, after 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will restore us, something like that. And you think, okay, so Hosea was writing sometime maybe around 700 BC or around there. And so what okay, a day is 1,000 years, represents 1,000 years. So 2,000 years after that, 3,000, in the 3,000 year, he will revive us. I mean, Israel never really was a nation, even when they came back from exile. Remember, in the days of Jesus, I mean, the people were so waiting for a Messiah to save them from occupation, because they weren't really a country. They were allowed to have their own sort of government, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, right? They were under the Romans, but they could sort of do some things themselves. But that wasn't a country, and they knew it. That's why they were craving the Messiah. They were craving independence. They had so many revolts, and now what Israel has after 1948, is it 1948 or 1947? I always get the independence of India and Israel. I mean, like the partition of Pakistan and India mixed up with the nation of Israel. But that happened in my grandparents' lives. My grandparents were young adults when that happened. Think about that. These prophecies, the biblical prophecies that seem to be happening. And you know, you read something in the Bible and it's not, some things are very clear. Some things are, they take a little bit of thought and you wonder about them. For example, that verse in Hosea 6. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will restore us. After 2 days, okay, that's after 2,000 years. On the third, in the third 1,000 years. Could it be meaning from the time that Hosea wrote that? Or is it from the time of Christ? So 2,000 years after Christ, he would revive us. On the third day, restore us. The millennium reign. Could it have a double meaning? Could it have a double application there? One for Israel, one for the church. You know, you wonder about these things. That's why the books of the prophets especially are so interesting, because they make you wonder. Okay, what is this speaking about? Which time period is it speaking about? And you know what? We should not fall into what the exiles in Ezekiel, the exilee, what's the word? People in exile during the time of Ezekiel. We shouldn't fall into their attitude of their mode of thinking, where they say, well, look, all these visions are for the distant future. They're far away. No, we should not think that at all. Every word of the Lord will come to pass, and we should be living every day with urgency. This is why right now I'm making this video. I could be doing other things. I'm not. We struggle against the flesh, right? Our struggle is with temptation, with distractions. We just are constantly bombarded with things that take our eyes off the central thing. And that is the return of Christ. Is this real? Do you believe that there's a man really existing right now in another realm that you can't see? Is there a physical man named Jesus in another realm that we cannot see, that he's coming back to this earth? Like, is this just ludicrous? Because there's no point in just kind of trying to enjoy Christianity and, you know, you're trying to be a good person and doing all that stuff if you really don't believe that he's coming back. I mean, what's the point? What's the point in just enjoying, you know, being Christian? I met a guy once, actually, an elderly man, a scholar, one of the most world's renowned scholars in some field, ancient manuscripts, or I met him on a plane going to Germany, and he was going to Switzerland, I think it was, to meet with a group of people who specialized in. They were going to do something with this Coptic scroll that had been found or something like that. Anyway, so he knew the Bible backwards and forwards. And he went to church. I can't remember which kind of church he went to. He lived in BC, Canada. But he was originally, I think, Dutch or Swiss. I can't remember. And so he was going there, and I had a fascinating conversation with him. But about halfway or a few hours into our conversation, I kind of got the feeling that something was off. And so I asked him point blank. I said, "Do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead?" And he said, "No." Can you imagine that? A guy who goes to church and who knows the Bible backwards and forwards, like he knew the Bible very well, the history of the books and, when they were written, all the just the historical issues along with these books and all of that. It's like, man, he knew so much. He did not believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And I just asked him, what's the point? What's the point in all of this? And he said, "Oh, it just kind of gives my life some meaning." Are you doing Christianity just to give your life some meaning? Is it making your life a little bit better? Are you married to a Christian husband because, he's kind of a decent guy? If he's a Christian, he's going to be a decent guy, and he's probably not going to cheat on you as much as maybe a pagan man would. Is that why you're into this? Do you want to just take your kids to Sunday school and have a nice family life? And is that what you're in this for? For kind of a nice, just a good life, a problem-free life? I think many Christians, honestly, are really happy with the way things are going. They would say, well, we're happy. We have got a nice church. We've got the Spirit of God. God is with us. We're good. We're happy. If this could continue forever, we would be happy. And then there are people like me who say, until Christ is reigning from Mount Zion, I'm not going to be overly content. I mean, yes, contentment to know that he's coming, to know that all his words are going to be fulfilled, to be watching and waiting, but not a contentment in the way things are going. This world is a wicked place. We cannot achieve the kingdom of God through our might and power. Remember what God said in the book of Haggai, "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty." By the Spirit of God. Some Christians think that basically our job is to preach the gospel until the kingdom fills the whole earth. Well, that's never going to happen. The kingdom will not come about through our preaching and it fills the earth. The kingdom will come when Psalm 2 is fulfilled. Remember what God says, "As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill." Right? Remember what it says, he'll break the nations with his rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Has he done that? Like when he had the crown of thorns placed on his head, when he had the words "King of the Jews" written above his head on the cross, was that his coronation? Now is he kind of reigning in heaven and it's all just kind of everything's going well? That doesn't make any sense, right? Because what he said, remember the parable where he goes away? He goes to a distant country and is crowned king and then comes back and deals with the people that didn't want him to be king over them. He went to a faraway country. He is king in one sense now. He is king over the whole earth. But he's not king in that sense on earth right now. He's not reigning over this earth. Look, if he were here, do you think there would be any wickedness in his kingdom? Do you think he'd just be kind of sitting in Jerusalem and like a whole bunch of people raping each other and like doing a bunch of theft and everything like that? And he's just like, "Oh, well, I hope my followers will kind of like teach these people to..." That's not how a king acts. A king rules with justice, and the king deals with the issue. Right? He isn't just kind of, oh, well, I hope everything. That's not the kind of guy Jesus is. He's not an, oh, well, he's not that kind of guy. He's not that kind of king. He will reign with blazing justice from Jerusalem. That's, if there's any theme in the Bible that is just hammered home over and over again, that is it. There's none of this, oh, we're going to heaven and build me a cabin in the corner of glory land and I'm just going to kind of sing with the angels in heaven for. No, look, if that's the case, the Bible makes no sense. What about all this physical stuff in the Bible? Isaiah 35, Isaiah 25, all the prophets. I mean, everything is physical. This land will be raised up, that'll be lowered, this king will come here, this king, this city will be uprooted there, all this will be a wasteland over here, and this and that. There's going to be a highway over here through there, the deserts are going to change to this and that. Look, it's all physical. If it's all just a metaphor, if you think the whole Bible is just kind of metaphorical and you know what, those are the people who don't actually read the Bible. They just think, oh, the Bible can't really be understood. It's all just kind of figurative language. Basically, we just need to believe in Jesus and go to heaven. A lot of my relatives actually have that idea, and they don't read the Bible at all. It's very obvious by looking at their lives. They don't even know the Bible. They've been Christians their entire life, and they couldn't even quote you 5 verses of the Bible. What a shame. It makes it very hard to deal with my relatives because they're not biblical, urgent Bible lovers. They're not urgent watchers for the King. Are you watching urgently today? If you're a Christian wife, understand that you don't have much time left. Show urgency. Increase your speed of sanctification. Now you might say, well, Mark, it's God who does a work in my life. It's not, sanctification is a work of Him. It's not a work of me. Well, okay, then why are you blocking His work and making it so slow? Put it that way. Okay. Why are you so stubborn and stiff-necked? They despised the people in the desert. They despised the promised land. You know how close they were, how quickly the process would have gone if they had been faithful to God? Remember what Moses says at the beginning of Deuteronomy. He says it takes 11 days, I think it's 11 days, to go from Horeb, I think, to Kadesh Barnea, which was the entry, basically right the border of the promised land, and they were supposed to go and take the land from the south. 11 days. He says it's an 11-day walk between these places. They could have literally, after God had taken them through the sea, if they had just gone to Mount Sinai, not worshipped the golden calf, and just followed faithfully, it would have been a quick, painless process. If they had trusted in God. But you know what it says in Psalm 106, I believe? They despised the promised land. Why? Because they did not believe His words. Do you believe that His kingdom is coming here on the earth? If not, you're despising the promised land. Are you saying, look, I don't know all this stuff. We're in the desert here and I just want to eat my food and just, why do we have to be living in this wilderness and whatever? And you know what happened? In the wilderness, they yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. When they were in that hardship, they gave in to temptation, what their soul craved. It says that. They were given over to their cravings. Why they craved in the desert, they craved comfort, right? How true is that in our lives when we're in the period of wilderness and desert? That's the time we must follow faithfully and wait. When we're in exile, we need to wait. Like Daniel and his friends, it's hard work waiting in exile. And remember what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 1. We are in exile right now. This whole existence that we're in now, this phase, we are in exile awaiting the kingdom of God. He says it multiple times. We're in exile. We need to live as though we're in exile. And how does a person live when they're in exile? The same way they're supposed to live when they're in the desert. Faithfulness to God. Walk. Remember what it says in Isaiah chapter 26? Walking in the way of your laws, we wait for you. Right? It's not that we're going to bring the kingdom ourselves. No, we are just doing what is right and waiting for the Lord. Walking in the way of your laws, we wait for you. He is the one who's coming. He is the one who's going to crush evil. He's the one who's going to bring vindication to his servants, to all his faithful ones. He's going to recompense them. He's going to repay them for all the bullshit that was done to them. All the betrayal, all the thievery, all the abuse, just all the trials and tribulations that came upon the people of God, and they stood faithful. That will be credited to them as righteousness for endless generations. That's what it says in Psalm 106 regarding Phinehas. When he stood up, it says, then Phinehas stood up and the plague stopped. Look, we live in vile times. Are you going to be the one to stand up? As a Christian wife, are you going to stand up to all this unsubmissiveness happening in the world? Among women, wives, do you know a single woman who's submissive to her husband? Really? Who understands this? Who spent even 5 minutes searching the scriptures in what this means and how to do it? Even 5 seconds? Anybody? I haven't. Not a single woman in my life have I ever met who's even spent 5 seconds thinking about this stuff. Be the one in a billion, the only woman on this planet. Just like all those women in the Bible, the few, not all of them, the few in the Bible. There was like one per generation, if that, maybe 1 in 10 generations or 100 generations that were amazing. There was Ruth, there was Abigail, there was Esther. Right? They stood out. And why did God use them? Because they were humble. They understood how to be beautiful, and they are honored throughout all generations. That's why we remember the women in the New Testament, the Marys, for example, both Marys. We remember them as outstanding women because they were humble. Mary, the mother of the Lord, was really humble. That's why he chose her. Mary Magdalene, just a humble woman. Oh, beautiful. Just these women. God, give us women like this today, who are urgent. Sovereign Lord, please open our hearts to your word, that we may live with urgency. We don't have much time left. Everybody's saying, oh, well, all this stuff is going to happen maybe sometime in the future. It doesn't concern me. I'm not going to worry about it. Humble us, O Lord. Remind us of this day and night. Impress this upon our hearts, even as we sleep. Give us dreams of you, that we may be faithful Oh, Sovereign Lord, I ask again that you raise up a generation, a last generation of women. More than just one. Please raise up a whole generation of women who understand this, who get this, who get what it means to be beautiful, who get what it means to be good wives, who take this seriously, who take this with urgency. Lord, is there any woman alive today who has urgency in these matters? If so, please lead me to that woman so I can marry her. Man, that'd be sweet. I don't care what she looks like. I don't care if she's young or old. I don't care if she's fat or skinny. What a glorious woman. A blessing be on her if she exists. For the sake of your great and holy name, O Lord. For the sake of your people, just like Esther saved your people because she was quiet, she was humble, she had tact, she looked to you for strength. She looked to you for how to do her wifely role right, how to get this right. She knew so much hinged on this. Sovereign Lord, everything hinges on this. This is urgent. And I don't see any of your women caring about this at all. Oh Lord, at the very end, would you show your mercy to the young godly men who want to go for it, who want to take your word seriously. And they just need help so badly. They need a little bit of comfort. They need a little bit of support. Oh Lord, in the absence of good women, would you be their support directly? Would you give them a double portion of your spirit? But Lord, in your mercy, you said, it's not good for man to be alone. And myself and many men are suffering from that pronouncement. We don't have any comfort. We don't have any help. We need that specific help from women because that's what you made them for. We need a good wife. So, Sovereign Lord, I ask for all the men out there who are lonely, who are slaving away, who are struggling, who are trying to just walk the straight and narrow. Please, O Lord, be their support today. Please encourage them and remind us of the hope that we have in you. And man, is this good news that the world could almost be right at the very end. The 6,000 years could be right at the end. Impress this upon us, and may we live with urgency and not give in to the cravings in the wilderness. Keep your servant from willful sins. May they not rule over us. Keep us especially from sexual immorality. In these last days, we must be yoked to you in faithfulness and trust and faith. Not unfaithful and not faithless. For Lord, I am guilty of both of those sins. Unfaithfulness and faithlessness. You said, remember in Ezekiel, was it? Unfaithful Israel is more righteous than faithful. No, how does it go? Unfaithful, I think it's something like this. Israel is more righteous than faithless. Or is it faithless Israel is more righteous than unfaithful Judah? I can't remember which of those is which order it is. But the fact is that both of them are vile. Unfaithfulness and faithlessness. We must have faith in you as we go into these times. Even if we're facing the sea. We're facing our enemies behind us. We're facing the abyss in front of us. You, O Lord, make a way when there is no way. Stretch out your hand from on high, O Lord. As it says in Psalm 18, He sent from on high, He took me. He drew me out of many waters. Oh Lord, may that be true. If that applies to a pre-tribulation rapture, let it be. Take us, O Lord. We long to be with you. It's not about avoiding tribulation. It's just that we just want to be with you. We're sick and tired of dealing with this shit. Vileness on every side. There's just temptations everywhere you look. Oh Lord, keep us in your care. Keep us safely in your shelter, in your hand, under your wings. May your name be honored forever and ever. Help women around the world, especially wives. Help them to wake up and recognize the urgency of this current moment. Lord, I commit it into your hands. You hold the world in your hands. I am your servant. Give me discernment that I may understand your statutes. It is time for you to act, O Lord. Your law is being broken. Come, Lord Jesus. Maranatha.